Okay, so here we have a start with one metal extractor, wind generator, a second metal extractor, two wind generators. Generally the build, it's kind of a nitpick, but I would start with the three metal extractors, then some wind generators, then factory. I just do that because you're likely to be more constrained in metal rather than energy. And so you want to make sure you're getting that third metal extractor definitely before you put out the factory. Bad with micro units, so tried a new strat, but I'm not sure if you just got carried by flash or not. Well, it's probably fair to say that you definitely got carried by flash, but I'll make sure I let you know whether your strategy's working and being useful. Yeah. And how you can do some carrying some of your own. Okay, so we're going to walk the commander up here and then, or is that the constructor? No, that's the commander building those. I would very much make sure that you keep your commander either here at the factory or out on the front line. That's because the commander is good at two things. The commander is good at building, and it's good at the commander's good at building and it's good at shooting. So you want to walk the commander around as little as possible. So you don't want it to be walking all the way up here to this metal extractor. I'd send a single T1 constructor up here to get that metal spot, and leave your commander down here. It can build some more wind generators here. Another note to make is you have plenty of resources in storage at this point in time. I generally advise always having at least one constructor assisting your factory. Second constructor comes out and it's building converters. Generally the advice given with converters and energy is just don't build them. So if you're having to build converters, that means you've built too much energy production, and you might as well be putting your resources into building units rather than building more energy production and conversion power. There is the fact that wind is highly variable, but I'd personally respond to that with an energy storage rather than converters, so that when the wind speed is really high, you store up all your excess energy, and then when wind's low and you're not producing any energy, you just use everything that you've stored. And if you find it difficult to manage that correctly, then my advice would be don't build wind generators at all, and build solars and advanced solars, because solars and advanced solars are less efficient than wind generators on most maps, but they're stable, and because they're stable, you might find that you build less because you don't have to build like excess for the times when the wind speed is very low. And so why I'm making the point about the resources you're spending on energy production and stuff. Currently you've spent about 800 metal on energy production. Flash has spent 600 metal on energy production, and so that's a bunch of extra resources that you could have put into units that could have been fighting on the front line. So you just shared those pawns to Flash. Okay, that's reasonable. I mean, he is a high skill player, so he is going to use those units more effectively than you would. I'd probably advise against that, because you want to be practicing, you want to be learning how to use the units yourself. And so as much as you might want to win now, say, by microing those units now, then you might be getting better at using them in the future. That said, if sharing the units to Flash is allowing you to focus on your economy and get your economy down and high quality, then if you're not like spending time doing nothing, then it should be fine. So yeah, in terms of unit selection, I would say that was a decent unit selection. There's a lot of defenses that go up on the front line on this map, so you generally don't need light units. You need heavier units like the Rocketeer to fight against those defenses. That said, the enemy doesn't have many defenses, so your lighter units are probably going to be a better option here, offensively. Yeah, regarding your economy and going for Tech 2, firstly, want to note with these converters, it's kind of hard to tell because of your color, but if they're not yellow, like yellow is in the build image here, so that one's yellow, that one's not. This one's actually converting something, but all of these aren't. They're off. They're not doing anything. And so by building extra converters, you're using energy that you could be converting into metal to build converters, rather than converting into metal that you can use to build your factory. So that's a consideration there. It does look like you've got enough energy for the amount of metal you have, but what most people do, because what most people do for resources at this point in the game is that rather than keeping their commander around to build, they build construction turrets, one of these things, because a construction turret builds almost as fast as a commander, and then they walk their commander over to somewhere where there isn't anything. So say they might walk the commander all the way down to here, and then they'll self-destruct the commander, and then they'll bring over a constructor and reclaim the wreckage. Because the commander wreckage gives 2,000 metal, which is a huge amount of metal. And then construction turrets are relatively cheap in comparison. The other thing you can note is this laser tower isn't really needed anymore, because the front line has it covered really well. And so you can reclaim that, use the reclaim command to reclaim that laser tower and get that extra metal, which will help you build that metal extractor faster. And I would say right now you could potentially even stop building energy briefly, because you do have so much energy that all these converters are turning on. One thing I would definitely do is see how this energy bar is going like over the end, because your production is greater than your storage. I believe if I look at energy excess, you're accessing a lot of energy because you can't store it because you don't have any space for it. So there are a couple things you could do. The one I would advise is build an energy storage so that you have extra space to store that excess energy, and that'll also be useful when the wind speed goes down and you run out of energy production, like right now. And so you wouldn't have run out of energy so fast. Yeah. Sharing the tech tokens to allies is really, really powerful, especially the earlier you can do it, the better, kind of. So that was a very good move, and a lot of players will rush to Tech 2 in this position for that purpose. I think the general guidance with how much energy storage you should have, I think it's around 3 to 4 times your production is how much you should be building. Like, so if you've got, say, 500 energy production, you should have around 1500 to 2000. And so you'd build an energy storage to just bump that up. I think that actually needs to go up for like highly variable wind maps, and say the more construction power you have, the more storage you need, and so you need something more like 8 times or something like that. I'm still working on that because that's I don't know exactly how much energy production you really need. Baduso has said less construction turrets here. So if you see that you're running out of metal here, you don't need this 3rd construction turret, or even the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th construction turrets up here to build this this fusion reactor, because you don't have any excess resources to build the construction turret, let alone the fusion reactor. In fact, you probably could have got away with only 1 construction turret, considering that you still have your commander over here to build that. But something I would definitely do is, if you see that you're out of resources and you're trying to build this fusion reactor, you don't have any resources left to use this Tech 2 factory, so it's time to reclaim the factory. Yes, exactly. Less is more. On the topic of less is more, you potentially only want to be building one thing at a time, so maybe only build this Tech 2 anti-air after you finish this fusion reactor. It's sometimes like, because you've got to think, is like, can you get that fusion reactor done before you're hit by enemy anti-air? And I think the good thing is to go like, do I have the economy to put out a bunch of air, or do I not? I think your basic anti-air here would be enough to build before your fusion reactor, and then you can come back and build this Mercury after. Also, while we're talking about the Mercury, if we see its range down here, it covers your entire base, plus a huge area off the map as well. If you built this Mercury over here, say, like further forward and further up, where does this cover to? This covers to about this line here. So if you built the Mercury up here, you see how much more area it covers for free? So right there is where I'd build the Mercury, rather than down here against the side of the map. Yeah. Set more priorities. As in, focus on one thing. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. But yes, okay. I know you did say talking about the front line, but since you focused on economy this game, I'm focusing on economy, I guess. And focusing on economy like this is definitely a good tactic. But if if you want to really have me comment on the front line, I think the best thing to do would be to send me a replay where you've put a lot of effort into the front line. And that'll give me a lot more to comment about that and give you ideas of how you can improve things. Yeah. And this is looking like a very decent amount of build power now for the amount of resources you have. And like 1 fusion to 2 T2 converters is definitely a good ratio. So what I would have done is probably queue up the 2 constructors, and then you can get this T1 constructor. You can say queue up the two nano constructors, and then give it a repair command on the fusion, and it'll help build the fusion. And then you can queue up additional nano construction turrets after you build that fusion. And so you can kind of do that down the line. If every time you start a new fusion reactor and run out of resources, tell it to first assist the fusion reactor and then build the construction turret. So it only builds that construction turrets after you have the spare resources, because you're not building the fusion reactor anymore. Yeah. I mean, you could spread it out, and maybe this early into the game, it's worth spreading out. It's worth spreading it out when you've got, say, fewer defenses. But definitely later in the game, and once you're planning to build that many reactors, it's like you don't have space to spread them out enough, so you might as well just put them right next to each other. Yeah. Okay, so you're putting out hounds right now. Again, I wouldn't do that at the same time you're putting out this fusion reactor, because you can see you're hardly building them at all. In terms of unit choice, hounds are going to outrange almost every single unit they have here on the front line. So that's a decent option. But because hounds are something of an artillery unit, and they have all these fast units on the front line, a hound is possibly going to get kind of swarmed and outnumbered. And you might see that here, because your ally also has hounds, and he's bringing in these units. Okay. That said, he's just avoiding the hounds, which is reasonable. Okay, yeah. You'll see how here the hounds are missing most of their shots, and they just get completely surrounded by these ticks. They did manage to destroy them, but if these pawns had been a little bit closer, then the hounds would have been in real trouble. So against small unit swarms like that, I would build a welder. It has a lot of health. It has a really accurate weapon, so it's not going to miss. The welder's weapon does damage to nearby units as well. It doesn't have an area of effect per se. It just chains to 1 or 2 nearby units. The welder also does a lot more damage than the hound. The hound only does, in its standard mode, about 96 damage per second, except most of them are going to be missed. The total damage here is misleading, because you can't use both of these weapons on the hound at the same time. So it's 96 or 80, not 96 plus 80. So on the welder, you would have about 50% more damage per second than you would have on the hound. And then you've also got about double the health for a very similar cost. So welder's probably the unit you're going to want to use. And your welder will still outrange a Peewee. So we can see here on the go down the left, we've got info. Go across, we have the range, 180 range on your pawn, and on the welder we have down to info and across to range 280. So you still outrange the pawn. Another good unit against swarms is the Fat Boy. Again, it's an artillery unit like the Hound, so it's kind of likely to miss, and it has a very low damage per second, except that if we go down to info across to area of effect, we have 120 area of effect on the Fat Boy. So if they have a really huge clump of units, the Fat Boy can be really good because its area of effect will do its damage to a bunch of units in that area. So your welder and your Fat Boy are going to be your two best units against a swarm. And so what I do is I build 1 or 2 Fat Boys and surround them by welders. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, you're still very slowly putting out units. I just watched this. So remember what I was saying about your storage and your production here? You're accessing a lot of resources. Part of the reason you're accessing resources is because your storage isn't quite big enough, but also you just don't have enough converters. But I think that would be rather because you've got too few production, but because Black doesn't have any energy converters and he has a huge amount of resource production. So you can just pay attention to that and go like, okay, I'm accessing a bunch of resources. I can build extra converters. Even though I'm using everything I'm producing, I might as well use the stuff that my team is producing as well. With these construction turrets, I see you've told them to guard the Tech 2 constructor. I'm curious why you've done that, because I'm not sure what the benefit would be of doing that. I'll also comment here, you're attempting to construct a nuke and an anti-nuke and put out units for the front line at the same time. I'd do one of them in an order, so I'd start with the anti-nuke, then finish the nuke, and then go back to building units. Although it looks like you've decided you want to build units, in which case I would just avoid building the anti-nuke. Avoid building the nuke at all. I definitely get an anti-nuke because no one else has an anti-nuke, and so you want to make sure that you're not vulnerable to a nuke. But yeah. Okay. Flash is also constructing a nuke. That's interesting. And Deltars is also building a nuke. Oh, that's funny. Anyone else? Or is it just them? It's just them. Okay. Yeah, focus on one thing at a time. That's a big thing. Because, you know, when you multitask, you don't do anything as well as you could have done if you focused on the one thing. Like, that's just a general thing. The other thing with multitasking is that it divides your attention, so that you're less efficient with actually performing actions, which is why I was saying earlier, it's like, it's a very reasonable idea to just share all your units to someone who's already on the front line and to focus on your base, because that allows you to focus on your base and delegate somewhere else. Although it's good to eventually learn to do both, just so you expand what you're capable of. Yeah. 4 people have nuke. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you don't often see a lot of nukes because anti-nukes are so cheap. And so you might see one or two in a game, but then the anti-nukes will just cover the entire map, and so there won't be anywhere you can nuke. So it's really cool to see a game where you've actually got people putting out nukes, and able to use them. Yeah. Alright, so something that I tend to do, and different players have like a different attitude on this, but I'll tend to say it's like once you've got a huge army of one thing, it's time to start building a different thing. So we see Bing has a huge number of hounds here. Flash, I believe, had a bunch of them. I don't know what happened to them. And you've also got a significant number of hounds over here. Once you've got a large army of them, say 20, 30, then you could start building another unit, like produce a few fat boys, or even go up to a Tech 3 army. Yeah, I tend to like to mix up my army. There are other players as good or better than me, like Groupie, like Flash, who will really double down on a single army. Flash will go for sharpshooters and welders and just only build them. Fonzie over here only builds ticks and pawns and anti-air bots and gets a huge mileage from them. So really committing to a set number of units is definitely worth it. Yeah. Badusu says advanced fusion after first one or two fusions. Maybe. Because the thing is, especially when you're building fusions slower like this, fusions actually can be slightly better than advanced fusions. They're less space efficient because you can build a single advanced fusion in the space of 1.5 fusions. But because you can build an advanced fusion for slightly more than the cost of 2 fusion reactors, and 2 fusion reactors produce only 2/3 of the energy of an advanced fusion. So in theory, an advanced fusion is more efficient. But you've got to realize that you've been building this fusion for the last 3 minutes. This, if you were building an advanced fusion, you would have been still building an advanced fusion for the last, say, 5 minutes. Which could be that in this time you've had this fusion building and it's producing 1000 energy, which is being converted into metal, which can cover the resource cost gap between 3 fusions and an advanced fusion. I don't know how long it has to be running for it to be worth it. But some player did an experiment back in the day that provided very strong evidence that fusions scale just as fast as advanced fusions. Separate metal makers from fusions? Maybe. I mean, it's a space thing at this point, and it's not a huge thing. Yeah, because you can keep in mind that these things chain explode, and I mentioned that earlier. It's like, try to space things out that chain explode, except you're running out of space anyway. So, maybe not. Your metal makers do die a lot easier than your fusion reactors. So, this means that you might accidentally blow up all your fusion reactors just by having a stray a stray something hit your converters, but then by separating your converters from each other between your advanced fusions, that means if one line of converters goes up, the other line won't, and so it's actually not as bad as it could be. Yeah. Okay, where's this nuke going? Okay, and it hits an anti-nuke. This is why you scout before you send a nuke in. So although you do have a T1 air factory, but I'll make a thing about this because I didn't see the scouts, and I know a lot of other people make this mistake. So if not for you, it's for them. Build a bunch of air scouts before you nuke, and send them over and see if you can work out where there is anti-nukes and where there isn't. Because if you had nuked, right here, for example, it's outside the range of this anti-nuke, and this anti-nuke wasn't loaded yet, so you could have destroyed all this rather than just hitting an anti-nuke. There wasn't a scout, okay. Yeah. And so if you can tell where the anti-nukes are, then you can pick where you nuke. There wasn't a completed anti-nuke over the top of the map, for example, so you could have nuked the front line here, and then these guys could have come through and ended the game right here. Yeah. We've got an idle factory again. And you'll also notice how at this point, you're not using all your resource. You are now that your factory's running. Okay, and we've got more construction turrets over here, so that's good. Yeah. Yeah, on the anti-nuke thing and protecting Flash, again, it's the same idea with the Screamer and the range, with half of it being off the map. Considering you only had construction turrets over here, maybe you want to just build it in the range of the construction turrets, just here, and that protects slightly further, so there's a slight chance that it would be able to protect Flash, although they could still, like, outrange it. I think the missile hit right there, so it would just have protected Flash there. But if you can afford to build an anti-nuke, like, right there, that protects the most area, and it will protect the guy above you somewhat as well. Just make sure you don't leave the corner of the map available to be nukeable, because that happens on occasion, and then occasionally someone will just go, I wonder, nuke the... Yeah, exactly. Someone will go, I wonder, and just nuke the edge of the map, and that'll be very unfortunate for the player who built all his eco in the edge of the map, but didn't quite cover it with an anti-nuke. I love the blue anti-nuke missiles. Boom. Okay. Yeah. Alright, so yeah, we're still building hounds, and I would still say that this isn't, and that they're not the right unit against these fast units. You can see how these other artillery units over here are struggling. Flash's hounds over here, they're struggling to hit a single unit. So that just kind of emphasizes that fact. Yeah. So yeah, I think I've just about talked about everything I can talk about here. It looks like the game should be over fairly soon too, because it looks like you guys have an advantage. Looks like their north is about to collapse. So yeah, we'll just speed this up a little and see what happens. Okay, north is holding up there. This is going alright. Sorry about the scribbling on the map. That's alright. Actually, this game might be going on a little longer. Nice. Nice. What happened there? Oh, he EMP'd the anti-nuke. So who fired that nuke? That was a really good shot. Alright. Yeah, so we're still putting out units. When you go Tech 3... that was Flash, okay. When you go T3, I would stop producing Tech 2 units. Don't necessarily reclaim the lab because the factory produces... Okay. Okay, cool. So what happened there was he had a paralyzer EMP missile launcher, and he had one right up forward at his front base, probably like right there or something. And he paralyzed that because he knew where it was. And then he nuked outside the range of the other anti-nuke, so there was only one covering that. That's why it's often a good idea to have like multiple anti-nukes covering the one area, just in case. But if you're this far back, they can't get an EMP missile that far back because it doesn't have that range. Like, they'd have to build one like right in the middle of the map, but you control the middle of the map. Razorback are definitely the unit I'd build, which is what you're building. It's the strongest units against light scout spam like this that Fonzie does. So yeah, I'd say that was a good call. But yeah, so I was saying about the Tech 2 plant. You might find it valuable to reclaim the Tech 2 plant, so to boost out your Tech 3 units, but you also might just find it advantageous to leave it there so that you can build like auxiliary units like your radar jammer, your spy. You might want ability to build like the anti-air and the anti-nuke because your Tech 3 factory does not have an anti-air unit. It also doesn't have like a construction unit, so you might want access to the construction units. But that said, you can just have a constructor standing here so that you can rebuild the factory whenever you need something from the Tech 2 factory, and then you just rebuild it and then reclaim it afterwards so that the resources can go back into building an army. Yeah. Yeah. This is a really good situation to have like a fat boy, because you see all those closely grouped units. A fat boy would tear through them. Of course, it would need something to defend it, because it fires like once every 10 seconds or something like that, which won't keep away the units. But it'll, every time it hits, it'll do a ridiculous amount of damage. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, maybe a better holding point for your units would be out here on the front line. So that they can just be part of the battle as soon as they can. It's good that this factory isn't doing anything anymore. But yeah. Yeah, and this is a really good time. So you see, you've shared the units, but if you hadn't shared the units, this would be a really good time to bring your units forward. This is the Juggernaut. You may be familiar with it. It's a very heavy unit. And so if you just hang around the Juggernaut will soak a lot of damage. And then because your Razorbacks, they're not very tanky, but they have a lot of damage. So if they just kind of hide behind the Juggernaut, and the Juggernaut will soak up all the damage, and then they can deal tons of damage So that's the best way to use those units. But yeah, awesome. And then attack going up north. And attack coming in here. This should be the end of the game, I think. Okay, this is struggling. If you pay attention to battles like this, you can see that Flash has just lost all his Razorbacks in this fight against this Bantha. Honestly, that's poor micro for him. Poor micro from him. He shouldn't have had to lose those units. But at that sort of point, then if you're paying attention to those battles, then you can go say, okay, that unit isn't working, I'm going to put out the Titan instead. This unit is called a Titan, not a Bantha. The Bantha is the old name. So, yeah. 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 It looks like they're pretty well keeping you out. Yeah, and more eco over here. This is looking pretty good. It looks like you've moved your conversion bar down a little. That's often a good tactic. It reduces how much you can have in storage, so it's kind of iffy early game, but it's definitely worth it later on. Yeah, there we go. We've got Titans coming out. Be careful about your factory waypoints. Okay, that wasn't a waypoint, they were just sent through. Okay. Yeah, when you send units in, make sure to watch them so that you know when they've maybe gone too far and they're in danger of dying and stuff like that, so that you can pull them out, because you don't want to lose units for nothing. You want to keep the units around and actually do something with them. I mean, that's better. Alright, so yeah, this is taking a while. This is pretty good at ecoing from you though. At this stage you can like start doing things like reclaiming your Tech 1 eco. It'll give you a little more space and a little more resources, because your Tech 2 eco are generally more efficient. Not always. Your fusions are sometimes less efficient than your wind generators. But on this map, the fusions, I believe, are better than the wind generators, especially because they're stable. Yeah. Ouch. Yeah, it's a good time. In a game like this, you can also build these mobile anti-nukes and send them with your army to avoid nukes coming and hitting the army like that. There's that option. Another really awesome thing you can do, you can see here Flash is building another one of these EMP launchers, the paralyzers. What you can do with them, and there's actually a game where I do this up on YouTube, casted by someone else. You can use these to stun the enemy defenses, and that's really powerful. I think two of them, one here could kill could disable those three, and another one here could disable those, and then there would be nothing stopping Flash from just walking through there. So that's something definitely worth investing in. You can build and bring out a bunch of constructors to the front line and do that. And then it also potentially allows you to disable some anti-nukes so that your nukes can actually work. Because as it looks like, you've only landed one successful nuke missile. So it's really only been worth having one nuke launcher here, I'd say. And then the other two nuke launchers, you could have put those resources into extra eco or another Titan or something like that. I didn't record. Oh. Yeah. These EMP bombers can also be really useful for disabling the front. Although I don't know if like actual bombers would have been more worth it in this situation. EMP bombers tend to disable things more decisively, and you've also they take effect faster, and your Juggernaut you've got all these units here to deal the damage for you, so you might as well just disable it quickly and use the huge damage you've already got rather than building bombers, I think. Something. Yeah, those EMP bombers are awesome. They're absolutely awesome. You can... A lot of people don't realize this, but you can use those EMP bombers to disable enemy anti-air. So what, you send like half your fighters and a line of EMP bombers to disable their anti-air. And then you send the other half of your fighters over and a huge bunch of bombers. And then you just fly over the disabled anti-air and take out their economy. That can be really nasty and very, very difficult to stop if they've invested in ground anti-air rather than fighters. So yeah,